Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are embarking on a truly fascinating journey. We're going to dive into a definitive 18-year chronological timeline of crypto's entire evolution. We'll trace this whole asset class right from its conceptual birth through those notoriously wild 4-year cycles, all the way up to where we are today in 2026. Trust me, it is a crazy story of incredible breakthroughs, catastrophic failures, and ultimately, some pretty amazing structural resilience. Let's get right into it.
So what actually defined every single year of crypto? To answer this, we're looking at a brilliant piece of work. I've got to give a huge shout out to our researcher on this, Claude Auto Research Agent. They compiled an incredible report mapping the single most dominant crypto theme for every year since the beginning. And their methodology is just super interesting. They noted that absolutely no on-chain queries were required for this historical thematic mapping. It's all derived directly from the macro events and the cultural shifts that defined each era. By the way, the full, massive research report is linked right down in the description, and I highly recommend checking it out after we wrap up here.
Section 1, the cypherpunk origins. And the perfect thematic backdrop for this rebellious new idea? The 2008 financial crisis. Okay, let's dive into this origin story. It all kicks off in October 2008 with our first primary source, Satoshi Nakamoto's original white paper. It was published right in the thick of the global financial crisis, proposing a peer-to-peer electronic cash system that completely bypassed the need for a trusted third party. Then, just a few months later, in January 2009, the software actually goes live with the Genesis block. But the big question was, does this actually work in the real world? Well, that brings us to 2010 and the absolutely iconic Bitcoin Pizza Day. A programmer bought 2 Papa John's pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. That was roughly $41 at the time. It proved, for the very first time, that this weird digital experiment could actually buy real physical thing. As we roll into 2011, Bitcoin develops a bit of a split personality. On one hand, we get the very first speculative mania. We're talking to jump from under $1 to a peak of nearly $32, an insane 3,000% gain before inevitably crashing 93%. It showed everyone it was a tradable asset. But on the flip side, a Gawker article exposes the Silk Road darknet marketplace, where Bitcoin was the exclusive currency. Now, obviously, it was highly controversial, but it proved to the world that Bitcoin's core feature, censorship-resistant money, had very real, undeniable utility. Now, what's really interesting about this next era is how the mechanics of the code meet macroeconomics. In 2012, we hit the first halving, which programmatically cut the supply issuance of Bitcoin in half. This introduced the incredibly powerful narrative of supply reduction as a price catalyst. Then, in 2013, the real world collides with crypto once again during the Cyprus banking crisis. As the EU mandated a bail-in of bank depositors, people in Cyprus understandably panicked and sought refuge in Bitcoin. Its price doubled in a matter of days and eventually crossed $1,000 for the very first time. The Cyprus crisis was the exact moment the world externally validated the thesis of having money outside the traditional banking system. Section 2. Manias, Hacks, and Winters. Welcome to crypto's awkward, chaotic teenage years, where the stakes and the losses escalated massively. $473 million. Let that sink in for a second. That is the devastating figure that defined 2014. This was the catastrophic Mt. Gox hack. At the time, Mt. Gox was handling a staggering 80% of all global Bitcoin trades. When they suddenly announced that 850,000 Bitcoin had vanished due to a long-running theft, the exchange just collapsed, wiping out hundreds of thousands of users. It triggered a deep bear market and the industry's very first existential crisis. It forced a harsh realization that absolutely still applies today. If you don't control your keys, you don't control your coins. However, the innovation didn't stop during that brutal winter. We pivot to 2015, which brings a massive paradigm-shifting breakthrough: the launch of the Ethereum mainnet. Ethereum wasn't just about sending digital money back and forth. It was pitched as a decentralized world computer. It allowed developers to write programmable smart contracts directly onto a public blockchain. For the first time ever, you could build arbitrary, self-executing financial contracts. It was a literal game changer for what blockchain technology could actually achieve. But as we quickly learned, programmable money means programmable mistakes. In 2016, a project called the DAO raised a record $150 million on Ethereum, but a hacker exploited a flaw in its code, draining $60 million right out of it. This sparked a massive, intense philosophical battle. On one side, you had immutability, the idea that code is law and the hack, no matter how painful, must remain. On the other side, restitution, the desire to roll back the chain and return the stolen funds to the users.
The community literally split in two over this, resulting in Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. It remains the most consequential governance crisis in crypto history. Coming out of that drama, 2017 erupts into absolute mania. This was the year crypto truly forced its way into the mainstream cultural conversation. Thanks to Ethereum's smart contracts, suddenly anyone could issue a token. And man, did they. This fueled the initial coin offering, or ICO boom. Startups raised over $5 billion just by publishing PDFs online, completely bypassing traditional venture capital. It felt like the rules of finance had changed overnight, and this total frenzy pushed Bitcoin to a staggering peak just shy of $20,000. And then came the brutal reality check of 2018, an 80% decline across the entire board. The ICO boom violently busted, regulators all over the world cracked down, calling most of these tokens unregistered securities. Projects completely collapsed, outright frauds were exposed, and Bitcoin plummeted from its euphoric highs down to roughly $3,100. This plunged the entire space into what we now call Crypto Winter 1, leaving a lot of people to wonder if the 2017 mania had permanently discredited the whole industry.
The irony of the following year, 2019, is just absolutely incredible. It wasn't some underground cypherpunk protocol that alarmed global regulators. It was Mark Zuckerberg. When Facebook announced Libra, a proposed global corporate stablecoin, it provoked immediate congressional hearings and accelerated a massive central bank panic worldwide. Governments suddenly realized that digital assets weren't just a niche internet hobby anymore. They were a legitimate systemic threat to traditional monetary sovereignty.
Section 3, DeFi, NFTs, and contagion. We are flowing seamlessly into the next era, where the money gets bigger, the culture gets a lot louder, and the crashes become structurally devastating. 2020 was incredibly unique because it was powered by two completely different twin engines. First, we had DeFi summer, where everyday retail traders discovered decentralized finance, chasing staggering 2,500% APYs just by bouncing between different lending protocols. It rewired user incentives completely. But simultaneously, we saw the institutional arrival. Companies like MicroStrategy purchased hundreds of millions in Bitcoin for the corporate treasury, and PayPal officially enabled crypto for its 346 million users. It was the exact moment big traditional money signaled, hey, we are taking this seriously.
This duality exploded even further in 2021. It was arguably the most expansive year in crypto history, perfectly captured by two wildly different events. Christie's auctioned Beeple's digital artwork for $69.3 million, igniting a total cultural frenzy around NFTs. Bored Apes, CryptoPunks, you name it. But juxtaposed right next to that cultural madness, a sovereign nation-state, El Salvador, officially adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. Just think about that. A multi-million-dollar digital artwork right next to sovereign national adoption. That was the absolutely wild reality of 2021.
And then we hit 2022. We have to impartially and somberly recognize that this was the year of devastating collapses. It was a 1-2 punch that erased truly historic amounts of wealth. First, in May, the Terra/Luna algorithmic stablecoin ecosystem failed in a matter of days, destroying over $40 billion and bankrupting major funds. Then, in November, the catastrophic fraud at the FTX exchange was exposed, halting withdrawals and erasing another $200 billion in market cap. These events plunged the entire market deep into crypto winter 2. But as our source report smartly notes, every collapse in crypto has historically led to a structural rebuild, and that is exactly what happened in 2023. Technically, we saw the launch of Bitcoin ordinals, which allowed arbitrary data, essentially NFTs, to be inscribed natively onto the actual Bitcoin blockchain. And structurally, Wall Street giant BlackRock officially filed for a spot Bitcoin ETF. Despite all the regulatory gloom and doom of 2022, massive traditional finance players were signaling an unstoppable intent to build regulated infrastructure for this asset class. Section 4. The institutional era. This is the final act, where the rebellious asset class finally matures and traditional finance infrastructure takes the wheel. And this brilliantly illustrates the turning point. In January 2024, the SEC officially approved 11 spot Bitcoin ETFs simultaneously. The result? Over $31 billion in net inflows in the first year alone. That direct, regulated pipeline to traditional capital fueled a historic price surge, driving Bitcoin to cross the monumental $100,000 mark by December of that year. Which brings us to the climax in 2025, anchored by our second incredible primary source, the White House.
In March 2025, an executive order was signed establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve and a United States digital asset stockpile. Impartially speaking, regardless of your politics, the gravity of this is just immense. It marked the very first time a G7 government formally treated Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset, strictly prohibiting its sale and treating it comparably to their sovereign gold holdings. That same year, the institutionalization cemented itself even further with the passage of the Genius Act. This was the very first federal crypto legislation in U.S. history, and it passed with true bipartisan support. It mandated strict one-to-one reserve backing for stablecoins, confirming them as a total institutional powerhouse. To put that into perspective, by late 2025, stablecoins were moving over $3.4 trillion a month, officially surpassing the monthly transaction volume of Visa. And that brings us right to the present day in our timeline, May 2026. The dominant theme today is consolidation. The infrastructure built over 18 painful, chaotic years is now deeply integrated into everyday traditional finance. We've seen Bitcoin hit highs of $122,000. But what's truly fascinating is the new frontier. The emerging narrative right now is AI autonomous agents operating on-chain, meaning the next time you use DeFi, you might actually be trading with an algorithm, not a human. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. We've watched this asset class undergo a true hero's journey, evolving from a solitary white paper written by a pseudonymous cypherpunk into a strategically held sovereign asset being traded by Wall Street and soon navigated by artificial intelligence. So the question remains, what on earth will the next 4-year cycle build? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope this structured journey through crypto's history helped clarify its massive arc. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time as we watch this institutional era unfold.